Hi, everybody. Welcome to Shisai Podcasts, conversations between scholars from around the world who study childhood, youth, and related institutions historically. As an official production of the Society for the History of Children and Youth, you can subscribe to these shows through iTunes or Google Play. Written and visual materials associated with each episode are available at our website, shcy.org. Enjoy.
Hello, Reidar, and hello, everyone. We are very happy to produce this podcast at the invitation of Dr. Patrick Ryan, who asked me some time ago whether I would like to talk about my book and on Byzantine Childhood, published in 2021 with Routledge. Of course, I said yes. And when thinking about who might be the person who knows me very well and who knows my work very well, the name came instantly in my mind, Reidar Aasgaard, professor of history of ideas at the University of Oslo. He's also my former supervisor. He supervised my PhD thesis, from which my book grew out. And we know each other since 2013, isn't it? Yes. When I joined the big project Reidar directed on entitled Tiny Voices from the Past, Children and Childhood in Early Europe, a project financed by the Norwegian Research Council. Reidar, would you like to say a little bit more about your project for our listeners and viewers?
Yes, just a little. Nice to see you again, Oana.
Good to see you
and
too.
Have a discussion on your book. I'm a professor of history of ideas at the University of Oslo, and I had this project on children and childhood, new perspectives on the childhood in early Europe. Some years ago, it started in about 2012 and went on until 2018. And that was a part of my work. It was because I cover mostly in my research and teaching antiquity and also parts of the Middle Ages. This was then a big project with which involved a lot of people, also internationally, scholars from different countries, and it turned out to be a very nice experience, at least for me, and I think was for many others, because we produced quite a lot of work and had a number of publications. And Oana's book is one of the important publications from that project. We also, myself, I've been working quite a bit on apocryphal infancy gospel, so I must do some kind of commercial also on this book, The Childhood of Jesus, which gave me, so to say, some of the ideas on how to shape the project Tiny Voices and to the approaches that we used there. And during this period, we also produced a book, this book, Children and Everyday Life in the Roman and Late Antique World, with many international contributors. And we produced also the book, Childhood in History, Perceptions of Children in Ancient and Medieval Worlds. And one of the contributors there and co-editors was Oana. So you also contributed to this in your project period. So
yes, it was a fantastic time and very productive, really. And there, my journey in researching childhood in Byzantium started and never ceased. Because I'm also still I'm very much interested in childhood, children, family life. So even though my book, I'm going to show it to our viewers.
Looks nice.
Yes, my book has been published in 2021. I now look at children from other perspective. I'm looking at hope and grief, so at the emotional dimension of family life and how people constructed different strategies which were revolved around children. So yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, but of course, when I started the project, within your project, there wasn't so much written about Byzantine childhood, not unlike medieval West or unlike antiquity, so not so much scholarship on Byzantine childhood, except for a few monographs which have been devoted to a large chronological time span or to perceptions of childhood. And I was really, really interested in everyday experiences of children. So I remember even now our discussions at Oslo, when I kept insisting, I want to do this and I want to look at childhood from children's perspective. So in a way, yes, my book is about this, children's everyday life. But of course, I couldn't only look at everyday life without looking at what childhood meant for the authors of my texts. Mm. Mm. Yes.
Can you say? I think it's very nice to hear what you say. I think it's very much to the point that this was very much an open field when you started on your project. But can you say a little about why you were more generally interested in children and childhood and this field of study, which was not a big field earlier, but which has grown a lot?
Yes. I read a couple of books, and it happened that I read also your book on childhood of Jesus. So I became very fascinated by this field, and I also worked with children in the past, with little kids, and I really enjoyed working with children from kindergarten to first and second years of primary school children. So it's such a fascinating world. And yes, and then I found out about the project Tiny Voices, and yes, I wanted to join your team. So luckily,
yeah. No, so you have also a personal experience and engagement within the field from early on, really, but then into developed it into a scholarly interest and engagement. Yeah, sounds very interesting.
Yes.
And if you should say something very briefly about your book, some of the main elements there, just before we go on talking, so that you give some kind of impression of what is the book about, what is the main topic of it. Can you present it briefly?
Yes, and if you don't mind, I'm going to share the table of contents. Perhaps it's a more
that would be great.
Just a moment. Here, can you see?
Here I can see. You need to enlarge it a bit. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yes. My book deals with childhood and children's everyday experiences of life from the 9th to 11th centuries. So I'm using a lot of sources of different kinds to look at how childhood was conceptualized first by medical writers, by legislators, but also by religious authors, which form the large corpus of my material. I'm looking at more than 50 hagiographies, and I was trying to understand from different perspectives what childhood meant for these authors. Of course, not only hagiographies, also I used some letter collections from 10th century about some young students at school and how they may have experienced the learning process in school. And I'm looking at childhood obviously from the time they were born until the age of 14, when according to Byzantine legislations, they were allowed to get married. So they started to take up more adult responsibilities. And culturally, childhood ended with this age. So I'm looking from a life course perspective at this life stage. So this is basically the first chapter, conceptions of childhood, but then I was very much interested in the physical and social world. And I looked at the implication of some demographical aspects, such as childhood mortality, which was very, very high. The age of marriage, of course, mattered, because taking into account this demographical aspects, you can understand the kinship universe of children, whether their parents might have been alive by a certain age. Put it that way, death was an everyday reality, a very harsh reality. And of course, because many children died by the age of 5, those surviving children would experience their siblings' death, other friends' death, also their parents, grandparents. Very little chances for a child by the age of 10 or 12 or 14, when they were allowed to marry, very little chances that the grandparents would be still alive. So this affected, in a way, their whole world and their whole social networks. And I wanted to do that in this chapter. And then I started, of course, with infancy and how vulnerable children were in infancy. Not only children, also mothers were at a high risk of death in childbirth. I also look at baptism, which was very important, not only from a theological point of view, because it was a matter of final salvation, but there was a concern in Byzantine society about what happened with babies. So the fear that parents would lose their children before, like very, very early in life, prompted them to baptize them so they would secure their final salvation. Also, weaning was a risky period. So in a way, until the age of 5, children were very, very vulnerable. So that's why the mortality rate has been estimated to be 50%, almost 50% by the age of 5. Other aspects that I have looked at were education and play, how children were socialized in domestic context, so to speak, or at school. What did they learn? How did they learn? And that depended obviously on gender and social status and financial standing of their families. In church, also they are very much present as performing different roles. And I discussed that in chapter 5,
Yes.
in which I also look at how they may have perceived church rituals, like being present in church during the Sunday office, what they may have seen, heard, touched. So I'm engaging with a kind of sensorial experiences from children's standpoint. Chapter 6 kind of wraps up the whole domestic network, and I'm looking at children and family members' relationship with mothers, with fathers, with uncles and aunts, also with other household members, with domestic servants. A special group of children were children who were raised and educated in monasteries, not only orphans, but also children whose parents were still alive, but decided to send them to monasteries, to entrust them to ascetic communities, to become monks and nuns. And at the end, a very interesting chapter about 4 children that whose stories I constructed based on sources. I follow 4 children in one day, the daily routine of these children, in order to look at how different may have been their experiences and how they interacted with the environment, with whom they might interact, and what did they do, how they experienced school and at home and in monastic context as well. So the life experiences of these children were very much different.
Okay, that sounds very nice, Oana, and a good overview of your book for us. So now people have at least seen the table of contents as some kind of a small taste of what the book is about. And there are a number of things we can go on and talk about and discuss. There are many quite fascinating things in your book. And I say this of course, as your supervisor, but also because I think that the book is a very valuable generally in research, not least because of some of the approaches you make use of in the book. I will not. I'll come back to that, but I want first to just ask you a little more about the sources. You said that you built on hagiographies, letter collections, legislation, and things like that. Yes. What sources do you think were the most important among these for the period?
Yes, well,
and most useful for studying childhood.
Useful. All of them are very useful. I mean, I can't really say in terms of usefulness, but maybe in terms of the glimpses of everyday life circumstances that we might get from. Hagiographies are very important sources for social history. So historians of Byzantine Empire who have done a lot of research on social history, whether we speak about women or other categories, they relied very much on hagiographies, which reflect some social realities. But of course, hagiographers, when it comes to childhood, they were not necessarily interested in this phase of life. Children appear sometimes only as background characters, but we learn about them We learn about childhood from the description of the saints when they were children. We learn about childhood and what children did also from healing miracles. So we need to always pick up pieces and bits and pieces and to put them together. So it's a kind of a puzzle that we need to.
Yeah, and it's really a big reservoir of material, these hagiographies. So, but what you've been doing then is in a way reading them or reading them a little against the grain or in between the lines, so to say, to see what do they.
Of course, because
explicitly and more implicitly,
right?
Say about children.
Yes, and what is important to point out is that childhood is very much idealized in hagiographies when it comes to saints' childhood, because they were special characters. So hagiographers were concerned to describe their heroes in the best possible way. So obviously they enhanced some features, and the saints to be as children, they were prodigy children. They behaved like adults. So we always encounter this puer senex topos, that is a child who behaves in a wise and adult manner.
Yeah. The puer senex image is also very common in other literature of the period and earlier also in antiquity. So, but when you read the material, the hagiographies, do you also sense whether the authors could have some kind of also a understanding of the special features, qualities of children and childhood, so that, so to say, it was not only idealizing, but something more also?
Yes, absolutely. They recognized this stage of life as being extremely important, a formative stage of life, and they recognized children as vulnerable human beings in need of protection and care. Not only this kind of idealized description of saintly childhood, but in general, children were in need, were portrayed in need of being taken care of, and in being guarded by.
So they were able to, so to say, to empathize with children in many ways and see how, and think about the development of children. But I'm just curious now, asking you, are there some cases where, so to say, they present children as some kind of agents, more active and more with more power in themselves, and not only as vulnerable?
Yes, of course, and that's something I tried to point out in my book, because for many years in childhood studies, scholars have taken this view that the socialization process, or in the socialization process, children are passive agents. But this perspective has been changed already in the past decades, I think. And now children are seen as agents and as those who contribute with within their own development. So they are active agents in their own right. And what's visible in my text, even though we are talking about childhood of Byzantine children, long time ago, more than 1,000 years ago, children are active in their play. So agency is seen, for instance, when they play, because they imagine they can contest the rules of gaming or playing or different games. They, even though they imitate adults, they can always imagine or taking up roles that they choose. Of course, not only in play, but also, for instance, also in monastic context. It's not that children are always obedient and they follow always the rules. So also a sort of rebellion can be glimpsed from the sources. So yeah, in this kind of instances, we can see children's agency.
It's interesting. One question about the sources that we'll go over to approaches and methodology, I think soon. But do you know about any kind of sources where children themselves, so to say, speak more directly or are at the center, or probably not many? So, but
no, unfortunately,
yeah.
yes, unfortunately, yes.
Some kind of evidence of children themselves, letters, perhaps. I don't know.
Not from my period
No.
of study, unfortunately, but there are. I think there are 2 letters, if I remember correctly, written by a child from 2nd or 3rd century.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. So we hear in that kind of material the child's voice, but not in mine, unfortunately. I would have loved to read something.
Keep on looking, maybe you find something.
But what's, I think, in some toys from Middle Byzantine period, I think from the 8th century, if I remember correctly, there are some toys that are shaped in such a clumsy manner that scholars have suggested that this might have been a toy made by a child. So we see children's a tangible way of how children manipulated different material and just made up.
We know that from antiquity. We know that from antiquity. Some instances of that where scholars think that this has been made by children, and some of them nicer projects, clay project things, could also have been made by children. But it's not possible to see that it was a child who did it, really. So
right, and I mean, we are fortunate in these cases to see something that has been preserved. But I remember from my own childhood, children used to play in my community with all kind of material. And my sources, even hagiographers, text sources, tell us that children are used to play with everything, with rocks, pebbles, with shaping toys out of soil, not soil, but
clay or something like that.
Clay, out of clay. Yes. So obviously, children just enjoy their time and constructed their own tools and their own toys.
So here's some kind of a universal element also that which we can recognize through the ages, even though many other things change.
Have changed, yes, obviously.
You touched a little on the approaches, methodology, and with the sources you have to work with, some kind of conscious methodologies would be quite necessary. And can you say a little more about that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
How
yes,
to find out things and find yeah.
my methodological toolbox was very eclectic in a way, because I used life course theory with intersectionality. So I was looking at different phases of childhood and took into consideration how various elements shape children's trajectory of life. So age, status, gender, health are important factors that influence an individual's life. And I have looked at how this, at the interplay of gender and status and geographical setting as well. Historical period also matters a lot when it comes to everyday life of individuals in general. And yes, I have looked at how these elements are at play in the description of children, and how childhood is conceptualized depending on gender.
Yeah. Now, so from what you say, this kind of intersectional perspective seem very important, because you can, so to say, try to see it from different perspectives and combine elements to, so to say, to
Yes,
visualize the lives
exactly.
of children. And, yeah.
And I should add that Byzantine society was patriarchal society, in which the place of women and of girls was minimized, in the sense that they were expected to sit at home, not to be in the streets. And actually, this is very, very interesting, because I've been talking with my colleagues who studied childhood in late antiquity, and they were very curious how come Byzantine girls are not seen playing together with boys. They are always described in my sources as playing in same gender group. So, of course, that says maybe not about everyday realities, but about how society expected, and how what the expectations, what the cultural scripts of the Byzantine society, in which women should not be visible, should not be in public, and girls should be kept at home, away from men's gaze. It was very important, the honor. So it was very important, virginity as well. So preservation of virginity. So we can see this kind of ideas in
that's very, very interesting. That so there are differences also across the ages, from antiquity, late antiquity, and into the Byzantine area and culture. So gender relations can be a bit differently configured, so to say.
Exactly. And I think that has to do with how society and culture evolved from late antiquity to the medieval period of Byzantine Empire, because women are seen more and more inside, so kind of secluded, are described in the text. But that also depended very much on social status. So, of course, a peasant woman or a peasant girl, we might we don't have to think about them as being inside their house, secluded, because they had to work. So it's more about visibility and invisibility, if I can say that,
Yeah.
in terms of social status. So
they have more their own domain inside or
yes,
outside of
yes, yes,
the public view. It's very, very interesting, and that it can differ also, depending on social status. So that's a way of thinking, intersectional, really. So
yes,
using those kind
exactly.
of approaches. You also, there are a lot of things we could talk about here and on methodology, and we could spend all the time on that, I think, because there are so many interesting things in your book. I just wonder about, you say something about senses and the sensorial. That's also quite quite interesting. And in what way do you use the senses, or what the role do they play in your book and in children?
I found very interesting this approach, the approach to how people would perceive their world via senses, which has been done. It's already for many years in medieval studies, in Byzantine studies as well. And what I've done in my book was to look at what children may have seen, depending on where they stayed in the church, because that's the place or the space that I'm investigating children and their sensorial experiences, and what they may have seen. Children usually, depending again on gender and social status as well. So there are varieties and variations of this kind of experience, a sensorial experience. Girls would stay with their mothers, boys with their fathers. Small children, both boys and girls, would stay only with their mothers. And of course, where mothers stayed, that's another question. Sometimes in the upper gallery of a big church. So obviously, everything that a child would see during the service would be different depending on the position, and also depending on how big the church would be, the size, and whether there were iconographical representation of saints in the church or not. Also, the sound in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the sound was absolutely fantastic, according to the studies that are done by Byzantine historians. So it's very interesting to just ask the question. Maybe, obviously, we can't know how they may have perceived, but we can ask the question: what, how, in what circumstances they may have encountered this and that possibility.
How they, in what context they sensed and experienced being in the world, so to say. I will finish this quite soon, but do the sources say anything about, for example, smell or touch?
Yes.
These are also senses, so I think that it will also relate to church,
I mean,
or church services.
Yes.
Incense, yeah.
Incense was a feature of
and a strong experience in many ways for children also.
Yes, probably, yes. And touch, I mean, obviously, when somebody would enter a church, a place, would touch the door or the curtain.
Did they have icons, for example, also? Would you think they touched?
Well, it depends. It depends really, because we are dealing with a period after iconoclasm. So after the victory over those who were against icons, and it's been a period when icons start to be used again, but it's very difficult to know whether in all churches the icons were again put in on the walls, or depictions of images, saints' images were depicted. Of course, there is a source with a child who recognized some saints when he was in charge with his parents, and the biographer says that he recognized the images of these saints about whom he was learning at home from parents. So biblical stories and stories about saints were very much important in how children learned about the traditions, about the norms, about how to read and write, because they used first biblical material, the Psalms and the scriptures for that. So a very different educational material than today.
Yeah. But a lot of impulses. You mentioned a lot of things, which contribute to shaping children's lives, everyday life, and also identity. So cultural identity. So this is very interesting. I would want to also ask you about what I would call some kind of use of microhistory. Because I think this is also part of your approach.
Yes, exactly.
It may have different names. I just when you go
yes,
to micro history, when you go to, so to say,
Yes, I was inspired by, or one of the approaches I used in the book that is visible in the last chapter is inspired from microhistory and history of below, which both of them are concerned with ordinary people and their actions. And what I have done, as I said before, was to look at ordinary actions, ordinary things in just one day in the life of a child, to see how their experiences may have looked like in different contexts. So yes, we call it faction, or we call it fictional microhistory, we call it narratives yes, we have all kind of names for this method, but it has been used by several scholars, you included, and I think it has been very useful for me as a scholar, because I had to think about every single detail. And also when I decided I want to see how a child may have experienced life in a monastic context versus a child who may have experienced life in a domestic setting, then I had to make fundamental choices. And for instance, about what is the age, because age mattered, whether a child was allowed to be in a certain space or place, or status as well. It was different for, as I said, for a peasant girl to be out in the field helping the mother or the father, and very different if it would be a girl from a middle upper class family, and so on. So and every single detail about just one day from the morning until evening had to be researched. So it's not not only a matter of engaging with primary sources, but also engaging with secondary literature. And I had to read a lot about different things, like what kind of clothes children wear, the tunics. I was even I was thinking, do they have like we call it nowadays pajamas, but I was thinking, do they have like different clothing for at night and during the day or not? And we don't know. We don't know yet.
No.
Or I missed that detail. I don't know. But also, the shoes and where a child is allowed to go, how big a distance a child goes for to school, how much time does it take for that? So this kind of things I have to take into account, and in order to construct something more plausible, and more close to children. So I wanted to provide the reader with a more organic view of children's experiences of life and how different they may have been, but also I pointed out some similarities because they were children, so they were under adults' authority. So some of social interactions point out exactly this. They had to obey to adults. They always they were not alone, even though they were, they were at home or in monasteries. Even though in monasteries the environment was very harsh. Obviously, there was a very abrupt transition from childhood to adulthood when they enter monasteries. But in terms of social relationship with adults, there are similarities, no matter the context.
This is also exciting to listen to this kind of micro-historical approach and the so to say this kind of also perspective from below, trying to so to say piece together the whole context, life situation as for a child. It's very interesting and really it's a way of approaching the material which can yield unexpected results and more a kind of holistic way of seeing things.
Yes, exactly. Although I must admit, I was a bit skeptical at first when I read other scholars.
Many would be, yeah.
Yes, when I read other scholars' way of doing, and at first reading, I was a bit skeptical whether this would be a kind of orthodox way of doing research. But since I've done it myself, yes, I think it's a very useful, at least, exercise if we don't want to publish it in this way. And I'm not saying that we should do that all the time, but this is a very useful exercise that makes us aware of different things that might escape our attention when we do traditional, more traditional.
Taking all those kind of perspectives into consideration is makes things a bit different, I think. So I very much agree with you. I think. And I agree also with your reservations and self reflection on it, because it is in a way a challenging approach, but my experience is also that this is very useful and can, so to say, give some kind of an idea of things and in a different ways than we do with just the minimal things we know. So it's this sometimes fiction or what we call it faction can tell more about reality. A novel can also often sometimes be more true to reality if it reality with the reservation, so called, but that it has something to give, which may be very to the point, also for research
Yes,
and historically speaking. Yeah.
of course, of course. I mean, I absolutely agree. Um, the pitfall is that we might let imagination to go too far, and
Yeah.
I think we have to be aware of that. And if we keep ourselves within the limits, so to say, and have our primary sources in front of us and see what can be picked up and interpreted, and just to put the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle in their right place, and then we need to fill a gap, and there is where imagination goes in those little holes.
This approach is also something that so to say involves different disciplines also. So when one can, so to say, join forces with other scholars from other scholarly traditions who do archaeology, art, history, and so it's so to say a way of combining a lot of different perspectives within this kind of fictional or factional setting, which yeah.
Yes, of course. And I remember a very good example some time ago at a conference, and I think it was in Oslo, when kind of I had like an eye-opening about this. Ray Lawrence, I think, was the scholar who has done a piece about how important was the height of the child.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, depending on how high, how tall the child is, how, the perspective of the city or the neighborhood or the house changes. So it's very important to take this, just have this in mind. We are adults, and we in a way forget about that we were children, we were little, we were small, and yeah, we've seen things differently, and we experience differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this
So
is also this is also very much about power relations, that the children are, so to say, they are smaller than and feel weaker perhaps than adult people, and there's a lot of things going on there also in their relationships. So
of course.
Yeah. Okay, we've been talking quite about a lot of things. I wonder if you should very briefly say what has been some of the main contributions that you have given to research, very briefly. Could you say just a little about that? And I would also ask you after that a little about what next, so to say. Yeah.
I think what I have brought with my book was a new perspective, or a fresh perspective, in the sense that I was very much concerned with children, and the focus was on children, not only on adults. Of course, because the sources are written by adults, one can't escape entirely the adult perspective.
No.
But I wanted to look at children, and they are at the core of my analysis. Children's viewpoints, or
not only the adult,
not only the adults, but children. They were and then agency and experiences in different contexts. That's what I think.
Yeah, not only the adult case, but also the children's gaze, and children as also of active and agents, active participants in shaping their world and their themselves. What next? What are you doing now as part of the follow-up of this volume? Just briefly on that, but what do you think
Yes.
of what kind of new areas can be explored when it comes to children and childhood and these kind of perspectives?
Yes. Well, I already said in my book that I don't deal with everything because it's impossible, but and many areas have I had to just exclude them. In my sources, I encounter a lot of children who are sick, who are disabled. It would I'm working on that still. I had a project after Oslo. I had a project in Sweden, and the results of that project would come hopefully this year. Yes, children's experiences of disability. It can be done a lot on this topic. Also, children's emotional dynamics and the emotional world of children. And I think that would be also something very nice to do. Emotions. I'm very much interested now in emotions, so I'm having a project in Tampere on hope and how hope is used by the Byzantines in times of crisis, especially personal crisis when their children died or are at risk of dying, and how hope is used in these instances in order to keep people thinking about future and keep constructing strategies for the future, for survival and continuity.
This wave of interest in the emotional, I think that's really interesting because it's, so to say, supplements this kind of more intellectualistic focus in much research on thinking, but this is also about the human condition, how people feel and sense, and so it's something that I think broadens the perspective within research in a nice way.
Yes. Also, we can't escape the dark side of childhood because unfortunately many children died, and many families coped with this tragedy. Poverty was also something that
and violence, for
violence,
example,
yes,
very common.
and the degrees of vulnerability of within a Byzantine family, not necessarily focused on children, but on the family as a whole and the whole social dynamics and what was going on there when poverty might
threaten or
yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. And I think it's a very interesting thing to do. And not only I remember there is a case in one of my sources, and that kind of, I still remember it. It was in a way very touching to read it. A mother, a poor widow mother with 2 disabled children, and she's going to the saints' relics to obviously in search for healing for her children. But it's very interesting how the hagiographer framed her condition, being a widow, being poor, and having 2 disabled children. That was the worst of what,
a
of her.
heartbreaking
Yes. So yes, we need to remember that life was very harsh in the past, and children's living conditions as well may not have been ideal. And yeah, so these are topics that I'm very much interested to look more into.
Sounds like a good plan. Okay,
Hopefully.
Oana. Yeah. Just go on. I think these are very nice and important paths to follow, and also they are relevant for today, as in many ways. Life is not always easy today
of
for
course.
children and adults, and sometimes it's quite difficult.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
I mean, I'm not saying that children's life back then was worse than children's life today. We are talking about different contexts, different culture, different cultural.
yeah. Some other matters you want to say something about, or have we covered most of the ground of what we could or should today?
Well, just for our
Audience,
audience,
yes.
I just wanted to show two pictures of children that are in marginal illustrations in a manuscript from 11th century. I hope I can. I hope.
Just try.
Yes. Just a moment. So share. Yeah, I don't know what happened. No. Yes. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. So this, I think this is a very nice way of describing childhood as a time of play, as a time of engaging with your peers, as a time where, you know, this is an agentic child or agentic children. So here are three children portrayed, two of them pushing a swing on with a child on it. So I think it's a very nice nice illustration that is found in a manuscript on homilies of Gregory Nazianzus. So you might not expect in such a kind of religious context to see such portrayals of children, but yes.
Yeah, that's really nice, and with the tree and the birds and the context, it's beautiful.
Yes, indeed. And another one, I'm sorry, I had to.
No problem.
Another one is this, with children in a tree picking up fruits, and then a child, a boy, throwing down fruits to his companions in the same manuscript on homilies of Gregory Nazianzus.
Yeah, and someone probably carrying it the fruits away on the back or something like that.
Yes. It's a kind of a basket in. So we may see children at work here, but this is not to say that children could not play while working, and we have actually texts, some stories of children who stopped a little bit during work and started a play, a game. So
yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's touching. Yeah.
Yes.
And close to everyday life. Yeah,
Exactly.
probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I think perhaps we should end this talk now, even though we could have gone on for quite a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's been very interesting to hear your presentation and your thoughts about both methodology and this material and children and childhood. So thank you, Oana,
Thank you,
for this.
Reidar, and it has been a pleasure as always to talk with you about our common research interest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And good to see you again, and have a nice week.
Yeah. Same to you also, and we'll meet again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Shusai Podcasts. You can find more materials and features from the Society for the History of Children and Youth online, shcy.org.